Good evening and welcome to World Today, your daily window to the world on DD India. It is a show on which we discuss what is happening around the world, get you that news. I'm Amritpal Singh. On the show tonight, we're talking about the upcoming meeting, virtual meeting between the American President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. What is expected from the meeting? What is on the table? Can we expect any breakthroughs, or is it good to keep expectations low? And the migrant crisis in Europe on the Belarus-Poland border, and as EU gathers to take sanctions against Minsk, the outcomes of that, we'll talk about that over the next 1 hour and much more. First up, the big news that we're tracking at this hour. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping all set to hold a virtual summit. Number of issues expected to be discussed in this crucial meeting. This will be Xi Jinping's first virtual meeting with Joe Biden after he took office as US President. Migrant crisis deepens. EU to slap new sanctions on Belarus. Airlines over escalating border crisis. Poland's Prime Minister says NATO must take concrete steps to resolve the migrant crisis on the Belarus border. Warsaw deploys around 12,000 troops, border guards and police. One person killed and another injured in a vehicle explosion outside the Women's Hospital in Liverpool in northern England. 3 arrested under the Terrorism Act. Olympic gold medalist Neeraj Chopra, Olympic silver medalist wrestler Ravi Dahiya, veteran woman cricketer Mithali Raj among 12 conferred with a Major Dhyan Chand Khel Ratna Award by President Ramnath Kovind on Sunday. Australia clinched their maiden T20 World Cup in Dubai last night. David Warner named the player of the tournament. So those were the top headlines we were tracking at this hour, and now let's begin with the big news of the hour. US President Joe Biden will hold an online or a virtual meeting on Tuesday morning with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. This would be the first summit-level meeting between the two leaders and the most extensive leader-level talks between the two nations since the Biden administration took office.
US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are all set to hold a virtual summit on Tuesday, Asia time. Tensions between the countries deepen. This will be Xi Jinping's first virtual meeting with Joe Biden after he took office as US President. A number of issues are expected to be discussed in this crucial meeting, like trade tensions, escalating military tension, climate change, Taiwan, human rights, and an Olympics invitation. A day ahead of the meeting between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, China warned the United States against interfering in the matters related to Taiwan's independence. In a phone call with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Saturday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned of the dangers of the US actions that might seem supportive of Taiwan's independence. US President Joe Biden has already said he's not worried about an armed conflict accidentally occurring between Washington and Beijing.
I think, as I've said, I look at China, and I've had hours of conversations with Xi Jinping, both in person when I was vice president and since I've been president, at least 5 or 6 hours worth of conversations on the telephone. And I'm going to be having a virtual summit with him. I've made it clear. This is competition. It does not have to be conflict. There is no reason there need be conflict. But I've also indicated to him, and I'm not reluctant to say it publicly, that we expect him to play by the rules of the road. We're not going to change our attitude toward the Constitution, international airspace, international sea lanes, etc. We also have made it clear that we have to work on dealing with things like cybersecurity and a whole range of other issues. But I'm not looking for, I don't anticipate there will be a need for there'll be physical conflict.
Biden and Xi outlined competing visions at meetings of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) forum this week, with Biden stressing the U.S. commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific, which Washington says faces increasing Chinese coercion, expected to be the leaders' most extensive meeting under the Biden administration, and will follow on from a telephone call between the two on September 9th. Washington and Beijing have been sparring on issues from the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic to China's expanding nuclear arsenal. US officials believe that direct engagement with Xi is the best way to prevent ties spiraling towards conflict. World Today Desk, DD India.
So where could the talks go? Could we expect some substantial outcomes of the talks, or could they be a damn squib? Or is it a good foreign policy initiative on part of the US president to engage with the biggest adversary, China, as the US sees it? Is that a good geopolitical foreign policy strategy to deal with adversary? We'll talk about that. I have to discuss that. I have with me Sirikant Kondapalli. He's a professor in Chinese studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Kondapalli, how do you see that talks? What are the expectations from the talks? Could we expect something concrete from the talks?
Well, the talk itself is essential because this is the largest economy with around $19 trillion, plus the $15 trillion economy in China. So the talks itself is good enough. Whether they reach some agreement or not is a different matter. They in fact had, as President Biden mentioned, there was the phone call in February and September this year, and this virtual meeting. There is also a lot of talk between the two before as vice presidents. Xi Jinping called Biden as an old friend, and Biden, when he visited China in 2013, when Biden spoke about friendship rather than old friends, the word used by Xi Jinping. But Xi Jinping delayed the recognition of Biden when he won the elections this January, and at Davos meeting, he mentioned about the initiation of the new Cold War in the globalization period. The Anchorage meeting between Yang Jiechi and Blinken was almost a failure because they accused each other. Then the meeting in Tianjin by Wendy Sherman in June this year with Wang Yi also was not really helpful in dowsing the differences between the two. John Kerry visited China, and as a part of the climate change related issues, the Chinese insisted that they resolve the bilateral problems rather than the climate change. So there was this huge problem between the two sides in relation to the bilateral issues. And there are a host of issues that you mentioned just now: Taiwan, South China Sea. There is a nuclear issue. The Pentagon paper mentioned about the 1,000 nuclear warheads that China is preparing. And Global Times editor Hu Xuqin mentioned that if the United States can attack China 10 times, China should have the ability to attack US with nuclear weapons at least once.
Okay.
So the preparation, that means then there are some crazy ideas like these which suggest to the competitive element or even bordering on conflict. So China's effort currently is to reduce that up to the conflict level, reaching very high competitive tone. When you look at the Taiwan Straits, when you look at the South China Sea, when you look at the Senkaku Islands with Japan, or even in AUKUS and Quad related, in addition, of course, the tariff related matters. There are over 70,000 American companies in China. So China is putting pressure on these American companies in order to exert pressure on the Biden administration.
Yes.
There is some $700 billion of investment the US made in China, but they have no full access to the China market. So there are issues even on the economy, and these are problematic in this virtual meeting.
Absolutely.
That they will reflect on, and probably they will. I do not see much immediate solution, because these have become very structural in nature.
Okay. Professor Kondapalli, you mentioned a lot of issues. We'll go to them one by one. I want to begin by that thing that you spoke about, referred to in your opening remarks about, you know, the two presidents meeting when they were vice presidents in 2013, and then Joe Biden calling him an old friend. But remember, in June this year, when a reporter asked the American President Joe Biden that you've called him an old friend, and would you press him to join with the WHO to come clean on the origins of the coronavirus, with insinuations towards the fact that it was, you know, it leaked from a Wuhan lab, etc. This is what Joe Biden had to say. Let me read this out. He said, "Let's get something straight. We know each other well. We are not old friends. It's just pure business." Now, as in office as the president, both sides have, you know, cooled that warmth that we saw earlier between them as vice presidents. So, if it's pure business, will the personal touch go that far to bridge the huge gaps and the fault lines, structural fault lines that exist between the two big nations?
It is difficult to conceive of any solution for these structural problems right now, because what China is doing is ratcheting up. For example, in the 19th Communist Party Congress, Xi Jinping, as the General Secretary of the Communist Party, said that they want to occupy the center stage. Center stage meaning here that they want to replace the United States at both the global levels and the regional levels. So that's a very strong comment, and they have projections till 2049, which means that they suggested in this document in 2017 that they want to be raise a world-class military which could act in different parts of the world. So that means a direct challenge to the United States. So while they're talking about business, and even in business, last January, 2019 January, China agreed to a reduction in tariffs as well as to buy more from the United States. However, they have not kept that promise, and that is the reason why the Trump administration increased the number of tariffs on the Chinese goods. In addition, of course, while the Chinese have retaliated with their own tariffs, there is nevertheless no keeping of the promise by the Chinese. Actually, this is not only the American growth on the Chinese, even India. For the past 13 years, India lost over $1 trillion in trade deficits to China. So this is also the growth of the European Union, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN countries or other countries where China has a huge surplus trade while it doesn't allow its market to be opened up for the other countries.
True. But Professor Kondapalli, if these structural problems remain over trade, over human rights, over Taiwan, over Chinese concerns on Quad, and we saw saw that phone call between Antony Blinken and Wang Yi, and they traded barbs just ahead of this meeting. Then why call for this meeting, and especially at this hour, at this time, this point in time?
Well, since the climate change issues did not result in the Chinese participation, who is the largest emitter in the world with nearly 27% of global emissions, since those have failed to bring about a unified format in Glasgow, so there is a requirement that the United States convince China to join as part of the global good, which is what Biden is also suggesting. Let us not tweak with the rules. Let us not let us abide by some of the rules that are there. The UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, or the space or cyber related laws. While China's approach, and also of course the Russian approach, is on global governance rather than on rule of law. So there is a huge difference, and they probably want to harmonize these differences with these virtual meetings.
Okay. But did a climate deal, surprise deal did happen at Glasgow between China and the United States, where they agreed to cooperate on issues of climate. So could that be a common ground with all the differences pertaining to the different issues that you've referred to and our also report also referred to? Could that be a common ground to get the two countries nearer to at least understanding their positions?
Indeed, that is one of the common understandings between the two sides. They, of course, broadly agree that trade should be part of the bilateral relations, people-to-people contacts, and other domains. Broadly, they do agree to this. They agree to on issues of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. For example, there is a dialogue on North Korea that they conduct. There is a dialogue process that they also have on Iran and others. So there are a lot of common grounds. The fact of the matter is, here China wants to nudge a little bit further and reduce the options for the United States or its allies, both in East Asia or in the Quad countries or in the NATO. So in this background, there is the American concern on how far do we go. For example, during the Clinton administration, they provided China with the most favored nation treatment and then admitted China into the WTO. China took all the facilities in WTO, but did not implement the market economy status, number one. Number two, it did not open up its market as it is required under the WTO rules. So as a result, the American business did suffer. But most important, there is this bad blood that is flowing between the two major powers, and that is what they want to now reduce. One doesn't know whether they can progress, because as the 6th plenum, which was held last week from 8th to 11th, it did mention about the turbulence in the international system and Chinese approach, but they insisted on that rejuvenation of China process till about 2049. China rejuvenation basically is to replace also the United States. So if that is the plan of China, then why should the United States cooperate in all these efforts? For example, there are a few incidents recently, including the submarine that faced a problem in the South China Sea, an American submarine. Secondly, since 2009 USS Impeccable incident, the Chinese have been nudging the American forces to go away from the South China Sea. They are also the September law, territorial sea law. It restricts any entry into the South China Sea, not just the American, but also even Indian or Japanese or even Australian vessels. So there is a gradual nudging, which in military terms are called anti-access area denial, but also it is being extended into the civilian spheres as well by suggesting that China will be the overlord in this region, at least for the time being, and gradually expanded to the rest of the world.
Okay. Given that, as you say, during the meeting of the Communist Party, where it was stated very clearly that they wish to pursue a more aggressive policy, the Americans have also made similar statements to the effect that, well, our attitude towards the Chinese will not change. The fundamentals of our principles that we follow in terms of human rights, etc., will not change. And Antony Blinken was pretty upfront with Wang Yi on that, saying, well, on the Strait of Taiwan, you need to do more.
Yes, indeed. The Americans have released their White House paper, National Security Strategy, in which they configured China as a strategic competitor. But they're not willing to raise this from competition to conflict level because it is so uncertain in this sphere, despite the Americans being the superpower for so long, yet they have also exposed the weaknesses in Iraq and now in Afghanistan by withdrawing from Afghanistan suddenly. So they have also exposed their weakness. So today, in this format, the Americans are not prepared for a conflict, another conflict, much like they did on Iraq or Afghanistan. So China sees this as an opportunity or a strategic opportunity for them to fill up those areas where the Americans have left, or nudge the US to leave many areas. For example, Southeast Asia. Today, China is more stronger in Southeast Asia. Ironically, it is the US which had set up the ASEAN forum, but today American role in the ASEAN has declined. Likewise, in other areas where China is nudging the US away, Eurasian region, they are also nudging the Russians away from the Eurasian region.
Right.
So with the Belt and Road Initiative and other programs, energy pipelines, or other infrastructure projects. So in other words, this becomes a challenge for the US on how to address China. So they thought of putting up the Quad, the AUKUS, the other, strengthening NATO alliances, etc. Because the NATO has also mentioned about China as a target. So technically is against the Warsaw Pact, and after the Warsaw Pact disintegration, they started looking at the ethnic and religious issues. Now China also turned as a competitor for the NATO, although pretty far away from the NATO geographically. Yet that is a new pattern that has emerged, which means that United States is putting across these countries in the vicinity and trying to control China's rise.
Absolutely. No, it may be a competitor, as the Americans say or see China, but that is in trade terms. That is a competitor in the race for global dominance of the economic or the trade system. But it's clearly a foe or a possible foe when it comes to strategic and military matters.
The American expectation is that China will become a responsible stakeholder.
Okay.
It has been a theme, Wolfowitz mentioned this and others before. When the Americans raised this, and the American concern is China is a free rider, China is using the American presence in the Indian Ocean, in Pacific Ocean, or oceans generally, for providing stability on the high seas. And according to a study, China owes some $350 billion for this kind of services that US is offering. So China's response is we are always responsible. So the issue then became a problematic between US and China in terms of the high seas protection, specifically when it comes to the Somali counter-piracy operations. China has gone alone. Of course, they also had some linkage with the international task force established by the US or the EU NAV force, European Union Naval Force from Djibouti. So this has been the theme, one of the themes that China should become a responsible stakeholder. It should behave responsibly.
But the Chinese believe they are already responsible, so there is no room for adding more responsibility. Nuclear build-up, nuclear arsenal, the missiles, they are also a major sticking point. The US views the expanding nuclear arsenal of China as a big threat. In fact, something what they call, let me use the words, which they say was very significant test of the hypersonic weapon system. Now, this is something, there are clear differences of positions on that. Say, for example, if you look at the Chinese side, you know how upset they were when the British decided to give the Australians nuclear-powered submarines, or the strong objections they made when the Quad leaders met for the first Quad summit in Washington, D.C.
The Chinese concerns on the nuclear issue is that historically, from 1950s, the Americans planned to attack China with nuclear weapons during the Korean War, during the Cultural Revolution, during the other periods. So they identified some 6 times when the Americans contemplated using nuclear weapons against China. So today, China is taking this in a counter argument, like the Global Times arguing that Americans should be nuked. Before Or there was the Dr. Chu from the National Defense University, who also suggested that the Americans would be less prone to supporting Taiwan because they have to sacrifice Los Angeles and New York. So it is an indirect threat that they proposed in the nuclear domain, number one. Number two, during Jiang Zemin, Bill Clinton's time, they have a non-targeting agreement, nuclear agreement between US and China. However, the current posture suggests that there is an acrimony in the nuclear domain, both in stockpile, second in operational aspects, and third in terms of proliferation. There is so much information, for instance, of China's transfer of nuclear and ballistic missiles to Pakistan, to Iran, to Syria, to also North Korea. So with these, there is this issue of dealing with the concerned countries, or the Americans at least. So nuclear dimension is also kind of problematic between US and China. There were many talks between them on the nuclear domain as well, nuclear issues as well, but so far there is not much progress. And with this information that we received from June, July this year, that China is setting up silos in Xinjiang and in Qinghai, Tibet, that they are setting up these ICBM silos. Secondly, they have also increased the nuclear stockpile to generate over 1,000 nuclear warheads. The Federation of American Scientists report or others, which suggests suddenly they are transiting from minimum nuclear deterrence to that of limited nuclear deterrence levels. So the nuclear dimension, because it is going to be destructive. In the 60s, for instance, the Americans made a study that in order to impose high costs on the adversary, if the adversary knocks off nearly a quarter of the population and half of the economy, then they would have imposed these huge costs on the adversary. So with 1,000 nuclear warheads, China is planning to impose those high costs on the adversary, that is here, the United States. So this is a big issue between US and China.
Professor Shrikant Kondapalli, my last and final question to you. Should New Delhi be watching these talks closely, especially what the American president tells President Xi on its aggression on its neighbors, especially Taiwan?
Indeed, I think India should be watching it carefully, because we just had the September 24 Quad meeting in person in Washington, D.C. And there are so many issues here: vaccination, critical technologies, maritime, rule of law, freedom of navigation, so many other things. So Taiwan, in a way, is linked to all of these, because if there is a military action by China on Taiwan, a lot of things get disturbed in terms of shipping, insurance, globalization, markets, IT hardware, because the Taiwanese, they have 40% of global hardware. If you have a war in Taiwan Straits, the global Silicon Valley, figuratively speaking, the IT industry will have ramifications with which India also has to be concerned with. So there are too many things here that as part of the globalization.
All right. Professor Shrikant Kondapalli, many thanks for joining us and sharing your insights with us this evening. Thank you. And moving on to our other big story. The European Union is all set to widen sanctions against Belarus as the migration crisis deepens along its border with Poland. Foreign ministers from EU's 27 member states are expected to approve the measures at a meeting in Brussels this evening. The sanctions may also target airlines and travel agents involved in transporting migrants and refugees to Belarus. Meanwhile, the migrant crisis is worsening, with thousands of migrants and refugees stranded at the freezing frontier.
These are the visuals of migrants who travelled to Belarus in the hope of crossing into the European Union. But now they find themselves trapped on the border in freezing conditions. Migrants were seen gathered by fires behind a barbed wire fence on Sunday near Grodno on the Belarusian-Polish border. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said on Sunday NATO must take concrete steps to resolve the migrant crisis on the Belarus border, adding that Poland, Lithuania and Latvia may ask for consultations under Article 4 of the Alliance's treaty. Under Article 4, any ally can request consultations whenever, in the opinion of any of them, their territorial integrity, political independence or security is threatened. French Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin said on Monday Britain's own labour laws encouraged illegal migrants to attempt the perilous crossing of the Channel by dinghy and that it was France which suffered from London's own inaction.
We don't need any lessons from our British friends who are our allies, but I would like to remind them that we are neither their collaborators nor their backup.
European Union's top diplomat said the European Union will toughen sanctions on Belarus on Monday and may extend them to include airlines and others involved in transporting migrants.
The sanctions are always effective. They are always effective because they affect people. They affect their wealth and their capacity of movements. And today we are going to approve a new package of sanctions against Belarusian people responsible for what's happening in the country. And we are going to enlarge the framework in order to implement other sanctions to other people, airlines, travel agencies, and everybody involved on this illegal push of migrants in our borders.
The European Union, which has repeatedly sanctioned Belarus for human rights abuses, accuses Minsk of luring migrants from war-torn, deprived countries and sending them as pawns to cross into Poland to try to sow violent chaos on the bloc's eastern flank. Warsaw has deployed around 12,000 troops, border guards and police, while neighbouring Lithuania has declared a state of emergency at its border with Belarus and at camps hosting migrants. World Today Desk, DD India.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said in an interview on Sunday that he had rejected a defense ministry proposal to hold snap Black Sea military drills in response to NATO activity because he did not want to escalate tensions in the region. Russia has complained about what it has called a dangerous increase in military activity by the United States and its allies in the Black Sea region. Tensions are also high over what the U.S. officials have called a worrying Russian military buildup near Ukraine and a migrant standoff between Belarus, a close ally of Russia, and the European Union. One person was killed and another was injured in a vehicle explosion outside the Women's Hospital in Liverpool in northern England on Sunday. The police said, adding that counter-terrorism officers were leading the investigation. Merseyside police said that the car involved a taxi which had pulled up at the hospital shortly before the explosion occurred. A male passenger in the car was declared dead at the scene, while the male driver was injured in a hospital and was in hospital in stable condition. Counter-terrorism officers said they were investigating the case with local police and that they were keeping an open mind as to what had happened. The three men aged 29, 26 and 21 were detained in the Kensington area of the city and arrested under the Terrorism Act. In a state, police said that explosion had not been declared a terrorist incident at this stage. Let's now take a look at what is happening in the continent of Africa. An attack by insurgents killed 19 Burkina Faso military police and a civilian on Sunday in the tri-border northern region where West African nation is battling Islamist militants. Security Minister Maxime Cohn said that the toll was provisional. The attack on a military police outpost near a gold mine in Enata came 2 days after another attack in which 7 police were killed in another area near Niger and Mali. Islamist militant groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are active in the tri-border area where several nations including France, Chad, Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso have deployed hundreds of troops. Sudanese Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan chaired the first meeting of the newly formed Sovereign Council just one day after thousands took to streets rejecting the military's takeover of power. The council is expected to name a new prime minister after efforts involving the United Nations to mediate between the military and ousted Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok were stalled. Pro-democracy groups led by neighborhood resistance committees are organizing a campaign of civil disobedience and protests against the October 25th coup. Let's now take a look at updates on the COVID-19 situation from across the world. The coronavirus has infected more than 25 crore 41 lakh people worldwide. So far, the number of recoveries stand above 22 crore 98 lakh, while over 51 lakh 18,000 people have lost their lives to the virus globally. The United States alone continues to contribute majority of the cases in COVID-19 in the world's tally. The country's COVID-19 cases have crossed 4 crore 79 lakh and the death toll stands at 7 lakh 83,000. Israel said on Sunday that children aged between 5 to 11 would now be eligible for vaccination against COVID-19. The decision, announced by the Health Ministry, followed approval by an expert panel last week after U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted emergency use of Pfizer's and BioNTech's vaccine for the age group at a 10 microgram dose. And Australia won their maiden 2020 World Cup title as they defeated New Zealand in the final by 8 wickets. Chasing a target of 173, Australia won the game by 7 balls to spare, thanks to half centuries from Mitchell Marsh and David Warner. Earlier, Kane Williamson smashed a brilliant 48-ball 85 as New Zealand managed to reach a total of 172 for 4 from their quota of 20 overs. For Australia, Josh Hazelwood was the pick of the bowlers with 3 for 16, while Adam Zampa returned figures of 1 for 26. It was said before the match by New Zealand skipper Williamson that the final would come down to individual contributions, and so it proved, with 2 of Australia's top 4 delivering the biggest stage in the run chase. First, it was the irrepressible Warner who smoked Jimmy Neesham for 6 in the 11th over to reach his half century of just 34 balls, and then they were unstoppable. Williamson's efforts were ultimately in vain, with Marsh and Warner making mincemeat of the chase to complete an 8-wicket win for Australia on the biggest stage. This victory for Australia is their first 2020 World Cup title, as they are now all set to defend their 2020 World Cup crown as hosts in 2022. Let's take a look at the 2020 Cricket World Cup's few of the best moments that will be etched in the books of history.
The ICC T20 Cricket World Cup has finally come to an end, with Team Australia lifting the coveted trophy. The game this time witnessed many upside downs and furthermore witnessed many game-changing events as well. Let's take a look back at 5 defining moments of ICC T20 Cricket World Cup. Scotland's win over Bangladesh. The first day of the tournament provided an upset that blew the first round wide open, with Scotland deserving winners over a Bangladesh side who were ranked 6th in the world at the start of the tournament. Scotland's progress to the Super 12 stage was a significant achievement for Kylie Coetzer's side, not least because it guaranteed their qualification for the next edition of the ICC Men's T20 World Cup in Australia. Namibia's win over Ireland. A superb team performance with the ball restricted Ireland to 125 for a loss of 8 wickets, with Jan Frylings and David Wiesi's star turns. Wasn't just the victory itself, but the nature of the win that was so important, as it showcased just why Namibia could and should be considered a threat to many of the world's better T20 international teams in the next World Cup cycle. Pakistan's win over India. Australia are champions, but arguably the most memorable image of the tournament was Shaheen Shah Afridi with arms outstretched after dismissing both of India's openers to set up a stunning opening win for Pakistan, who were one of the pre-tournament favourites. For Pakistan to win in such a manner set them on course for a spot in the final tour, while the crushing nature of the defeat set the tone for a tournament to forget for India. New Zealand's win over India. The Black Caps took their chance against an Indian side shaken by the loss to Pakistan, heaping pressure on the India top order with a high-quality display of power play bowling that left Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli needing to launch a rescue operation after both being pushed down the order in a selection reshuffle. Bravo and Gale's farewell. It was an emotional moment for DJ as he soaked in the adoration of his teammates in Abu Dhabi. The fairy tale finish for the two of the best T20 players to ever grace the game didn't materialize, but West Indies' final match against Australia did give Dwayne Bravo one final chance to take to the field in international cricket before his retirement. While T20 Cricket World Cup gave opportunities to new teams, it also did force some teams to once again assess their performance and strengths for more upcoming international cricket tournaments. With Australia lifting the trophy, the rest of the teams will take back memories and experiences with them from the biggest festival of cricket, the T20 Cricket World Cup. Sports Desk, DD India.
President Ramnath Kovind recognized the country's unparalleled Olympic and Paralympic performances on Sunday when he conferred the National Sports Awards 2021. Olympic gold medalist Neeraj Chopra, Olympic silver medalist wrestler Ravi Dhaya, Olympic bronze winning boxer Lavlina Borgohain and veteran women cricketer Mithali Raj were among the 12 sportspersons conferred with the Major Dhyan Chand Khel Ratna Award by the President on Sunday. Sunil Chhetri became the first footballer to be bestowed with the prestigious award. Paralympic gold winners Avani Lakhara, Sumit Antil, Pramod Bhagat, Krishna Nagar, Manish Narwal were also conferred with the Khel Ratna. Take a look at this report.
Olympic gold medalist Neeraj Chopra, veteran women cricketer Mithali Raj and history-making Paralympic stars shared the spotlight as an unprecedented 12 sportspersons were presented with the country's highest sporting honour, the Major Dhyan Chand Khel Ratna Award by President Ramnath Kovind. In a glittering ceremony, the President recognized the country's unparalleled Olympic and Paralympic performances. The star attraction of the evening was Neeraj Chopra, who was the first among the Khel Ratna awardees to receive the honour. Besides the 23-year-old star, other recipients of the Khel Ratna recognition were Olympic bronze-winning Indian men's hockey team captain Manpreet Singh, veteran goalkeeper PR Srijesh, Olympic silver medalist wrestler Ravi Dhaya, Olympic bronze-winning boxer Lavlina Borgohain and veteran women cricketer Mithali Raj. Sunil Chhetri became the first footballer to be bestowed the award. Paralympic gold winners Avani Lakhara, Sumit Antil, Pramod Bhagat, Krishna Nagar, Manish Narwal were also conferred with the Khel Ratna. Along with 12 Khel Ratnas, India this year has 35 Arjuna awardees. The long list this year was a result of the historic medal hauls at the Olympics and Paralympics. Indian opening batsman Shikhar Dhawan, Tokyo 2020 Paralympic silver medalist Bhavina Patel and para shuttler and Noida DM Suhas Yathiraj were among the others who received the prestigious Arjuna award. Indian athletics coach TP Osif and former Indian women's hockey captain Preetam Sewach were among the 10 coaches who received the Dronacharya Award. President Ramnath Kovind conferred the National Sports Awards to the coaches. Lekha Kesi, Abhijit Kunte, Davinder Singh Garcha, Vikas Kumar, Sajjan Singh received Dhyan Chand Award for Lifetime Achievement, while Punjab University, Chandigarh received the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Trophy for this year. Sports Desk, DD India.
And now it's time to take a look at the other news which made news beyond the headlines.
Yuma, a manatee in an aquarium in Japan's southernmost prefecture of Okinawa, turned 20 in October, adding another year as the oldest among manatees born and raised in captivity in Japan. Weighing over 700 kilograms, Yuma is very amiable, has insatiable appetite, and is the largest manatee in the aquarium. Yuma has grown to be more than 300 centimeters long and weighs about 700 kilograms. She is said to be about 40 years old in human years. An Italian white truffle weighing just 830 grams was sold for 1,03,000 euros at an auction held on Sunday at the magnificent 13th century castle of Cavor. The prize mushroom went to Hong Kong after an auction held simultaneously in Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai and Moscow. The white tuber, one of the most coveted and expensive ingredients in the world, was bought by the Michelin-starred Italian chef Umberto Bombiana, who runs the Otto Imitsu restaurant in Hong Kong. Venezuela sought to break the World Guinness record for the largest orchestra with more than 12,000 musicians from El Sistema, who performed a classical piece in full for more than 5 minutes in an attempt to surpass the current mark of a Russian group about 2 years ago. The musicians in white shirts performed Tchaikovsky's Limonach March for about 10 minutes. Guinness will announce the verdict in the next 10 days. In a tin shed in the back streets of Congo's Kinshasa, self-taught Sean Luther Misoko Nazalyaya, popularly known as Soklo, used breakable and plastic chairs to make guitars which are considered by some aficionados to be among the best in the world. For 40 years, breakables became strings. Pieces of plastic chair are hammered into the fretboard. The result, aficionado says, is a raw intensity not found in the top guitar brands. It's been a hit in London's iconic Kew Gardens for nearly a decade. Now the immersive holiday-themed Lightscape show is coming to Los Angeles for the first time. Visitors are treated to a mile-long course showing orbs lit with gas torches to the theme of Silent Night, pop-up colored Christmas tree tents, a light-projected version of Hollywood's Walk of Fame, singing trees, and the centerpiece display, a cathedral tunnel lit with thousands of LED bulbs, creating a magic arc perfect for Instagram moments. A Vincent van Gogh landscape seized by the Nazis during their Second World War occupation of France sold at auction in New York for $35.9 million, a record for a watercolor by the Dutch Impressionist. The 1888 work, Mules de Bleu, was purchased for well above its pre-sale estimate of $20 to $30 million. It was last exhibited in the year 1905. The work was initially owned after the artist's suicide at 37 by his brother Theo van Gogh. After passing through several owners, it was seized by Nazi forces during their occupation of France. A farmer in East China's Fujian province built an exquisite model of the classical Suzhou Gardens with 16,800 bamboo sticks in 6 months. The garden model is the fifth masterpiece by Chen Xinji, the farmer from Xinjiao County of Fujian, who began to make sticks in his spare time since the year 2017. The final product measured 160 centimeters long, 140 centimeters wide, and 70 centimeters tall. It contains 16 houses with several pavilions, terraces, and steps. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at the other major news that made news in the day in our nutshell in our segment News at a Glance.
US President Joe Biden has named former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu to supervise the $1 trillion infrastructure plan, the White House said on Sunday. Landrieu, also a Democratic former Louisiana Lieutenant Governor, led New Orleans from 2010 to 2018. He played an important role in helping the city rebound from devastating Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The House of Representatives passed the $1 trillion package of highway, broadband and other infrastructure improvements earlier this month. It was passed by the Senate in August. 2 strong earthquakes struck southern Iran near the port of Bandar Abbas on Sunday, prompting residents to flee their homes and killing at least 1 person as per reports. The quakes measured 6.3 and 6.4 magnitude, jolting the province of Hormozgan, according to state TV, and the tremors were felt across the Gulf in Dubai. Iran is crisscrossed by major geological fault lines and has suffered several devastating earthquakes in recent years. The quakes were also felt across the Gulf in Dubai, according to local residents. Hundreds gathered in Miami in a show of solidarity with the Cuban people on Sunday. Waving Cuban flags, they gathered near the Freedom Tower in the downtown area. Many demonstrators formed a caravan as they traveled the route between a Cuban memorial and the Freedom Tower. Cuban and US flags could be seen on vehicles in the caravan and on boats near the demonstration. The show of support in Miami took place a day ahead of Monday's planned protest march in Cuba. Opposition groups have called the march to demand greater political freedoms and the release of jailed activists following street protests in July, the largest in decades. Cuba's communist government has banned the demonstration, saying it is part of a destabilization campaign by the United States. Thousands took to the streets angry over shortages of basic goods, curbs on civil liberties, and the handling of the pandemic. Hundreds of protesters were arrested. Following days of restive protests and strike action that has paralyzed sectors of the economy, Bolivian President Luis Arce has repealed a law against so-called illicit profits and terrorist financing that critics allege is a government ruse to seize private property. Opposition civil and political groups have been protesting throughout the week against the proposed law, accusing Arce of using laws and the justice system to centralize power and crack down on dissent. After announcing its repeal, Arce called for an end to the violence and political tensions that have gripped the nation. Bolivia has been sharply divided since the abrupt resignation of former socialist leader Evo Morales in 2019 amid protests. His party, back in power with the new president, accuses the conservative opposition of leading a coup against him. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at the major events that made history today.
On this day in 1920, the first meeting of the Assembly of the League of Nations was held in Geneva. On this day in 1985, Irish Prime Minister Garret FitzGerald and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher signed Anglo-Irish Agreement. On this day in 2004, dozens of Havana nightclub The Snow Performance announced they were applying for political asylum in the United States. In 2015, on this day, participants attempted to form world's largest human image of an organ depicting a set of human lungs in Beijing. In 2016, on this day, Hong Kong court banned elected politicians Yau Wai-cheng and Baguio Leung from office. World Today Desk, DD India.
And that's it then in World Today. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.